While Avengers Endgame felt like the proper ending that the past 11 years of the MCU story arcs rightfully deserved, the film has left a lot of Marvel fans wondering what's coming up next. With the 2 phases of movies in the pipeline and some major events in Endgame having ultimately changed the face of the MCU forever, we can't help but speculate as to what's to come. So today we're taking a look at a handful of theories to have sprung up after the epic's release, with our list of the top 10 post-Avengers Endgame MCU predictions. And of course, there's a ton of spoilers in this list for Avengers Endgame, as well as for Captain Marvel if you haven't seen that one either yet. So with that in mind, you've been warned. Let's get to it. In at number 10, multiple timelines in Phase 4. This theory suggests that by the end of Phase 4 of the MCU, the universe will be splintered, and we'll be seeing films take place in multiple different alternate realities. Now, Bruce Banner noted that you can't affect the present or future by changing the past. Instead, going back in time creates multiple timelines. Each time you go back, a new one is created. We also saw in the film when the Chosen One explained this to Bruce, and how restoring things to the way that they were in the timeline is essential. This would mean that the Avengers in 2023 are in the prime timeline. When they go back to 2012, for example, that creates a new timeline, which for the purpose of this video let's just call Alternate X. While returning the Time and Mind Stone to the 2012 Alternate X timeline will prevent more consequences that alters the progression of what happens there, other events that happen in that timeline, like Loki escaping with the Tesseract and Cap fighting himself, will surely have consequences on what that timeline turns out to be like. So in other words, going back in time, they did splinter off into different timelines, even with the stones returned. So that means we know there are currently multiple realities established in the MCU. And in addition to all of this, in the prime timeline, the stones have been destroyed by Thanos. As Wong noted, the stones control an essential aspect of existence. This means that there will surely be some sort of fallout or consequences that come into play because the stones were destroyed. The theory suggests that Phase 4 will see some sort of cosmic event that all of these discrepancies caused, and that it may lead into Phase 5 taking place across multiple realities rather than just the prime one that we've been with for the last 11 years. A lot of time talk. Long story short, MCU could be going into alternate reality land in the near future. In at number 9, the clanging. Those who have seen Endgame know that there was no end credit scenes for the film, but there was one little surprise, a sound effect that played over the Marvel title card of metal clanging. Many believe that this was an Easter egg, with the sound effect being the one from 2008's Iron Man when Tony was working on his Mark I suit while being held hostage in that cave. While it could very possibly just be an homage to the hero and where it all began, others think it could be something else. The most popular alternate theory is that it was the sound of Eitri, the giant dwarf, forging a new Infinity Gauntlet. Others think that it was the sound of Wolverine's adamantium claws and is a hint to the X-Men character's introduction into the MCU. But to be fair, Wolverine's claws generally sound like this. It's more of a skint, you know? Whereas the sound at the end of the credits sounded more like metal being worked on. Moving on to number 8, Black Widow's death. Towards the end of the film, when Bruce is setting up the time machine for Steve to go back and return the Infinity Stones, he makes a curious remark to Cap, that when he had the gauntlet on, he wished so hard for Natasha to be brought back. While we can assume that the whole soul for soul exchange on Vormir is one of the odd exceptions to the stone's powers, at the same time, those stones collectively allow the user to be omnipotent and all-powerful, and can change pretty much any of the laws of nature. So could they potentially counter the rules on Vormir? That's what this one theory suggests, that perhaps when Hulk snapped and reversed Thanos' snap, he also managed to bring Natasha back, although she's out there somewhere, either on Earth or back on Vormir, now trapped. While it seems like a bit of a long shot, and a desperate hope of Black Widow fans, Natasha is set to have her own feature film, which we've all just assumed is a prequel that explores her early life in the Red Room and pre-SHIELD. That being said, if Banner was able to resurrect her and she ends up popping up on Vormir, her story could perhaps take a different turn, and maybe somehow intertwine with Hawkeye's upcoming series. If we're running with that theory, Hawkeye's show could very well be him putting together the West Coast Avengers, in response to what happened with Thanos as opposed to in response to Secret Wars like in the comics, and the team could eventually be working on a mission to rescue Natasha. There's also many a theory surrounding Black Widow that riffs off of how Gamora came back in Endgame, with a past Natasha coming to the prime timeline, but that seems a tad far-fetched, although Who knows at this point. And at number 7, Captain Marvel and Valkyrie. Over the past few months, the internet has been hardcore shipping Captain Marvel and Valkyrie. This fan theory has been perpetuated by both Brie Larson and Tessa Thompson, the actors who play Captain Marvel and Valkyrie. The two of them have been quite active on social media when it comes to sharing fan art, and even flat out knowing that they too ship the pair. Naturally, we can't help but wonder if Marvel Studios has taken note. Valkyrie was declared the first bisexual character in the MCU, and they may want to give the character a love interest, considering the main romance stories from the past 11 years have been wrapped up. Steve got to be with Peggy and got that dance after all. Pepper and Tony had a child. Thor and Jane broke up, but here's hoping Natalie Portman comes back for more. And Natasha and Bruce never really amounted to much after Age of Ultron. Plus, Carol just got that haircut, so she's putting out some major queer vibes. And at number 6, 5 years later. One scene that really stood out to a lot of fans at the end of Endgame was when Peter and his fellow peers returned to school, and he and Ned had an emotional hug. Because of what we've seen in the upcoming Spider-Man trailer, we know that Peter and his main group of friends were mostly snapped, since they're all about, the same age. But 5 years have passed, and that means a portion of their class that didn't get snapped would have already graduated from high school, and a new group of younger students, ones who did not get snapped, would have grown up and would be in the same grade as Peter. It's a strange dynamic but incredibly interesting, and has spawned a lot of theories concerning whether this means we'll get to see some iconic characters from the comics joining Peter's class. Specifically, the likes of Gwen Stacy, Harry Osborn, and maybe even Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four. It's also interesting because these younger students will have lived out their lives within a devastated world, dealing with all of the trauma that came with the snap, whereas 50% of the population will be significantly less affected by the fallout from the snap, having been the ones snapped, assuming they weren't in some sort of existential cosmic torture while they were snapped. Doesn't seem like it though. Up next, number 5, Steve Rogers goofed up the timeline. One curious observation about the film was how Steve Rogers, who went back in time to return the Infinity Stones, may have just goofed up time even more. So remember how the Chosen One said that if a stone was returned to that timeline, the timeline would be restored? So here's where it gets curious. Every time someone travels back and changes the events of something in a significant way, kinda like Loki using the Tesseract to teleport away, which would have an impact, versus Hawkeye bringing back his son's baseball glove, which would have no impact, the timeline becomes an alternate reality. Make an impact, it diverts. So in theory, Steve would have to be incredibly stealthy in order to return each of the stones back, and not accidentally change events so to create an additional reality, since the 1970, 2012, and 2014 realities that the Avengers traveled back to have already become their own alternate realities. So alternate realities, but then Steve creating more alternate realities because he just changes things up even more. So that's a lot of pressure to not screw up. I mean, he is Captain America though, he can handle it. Even if Steve did manage to get everything back exactly the way it was and didn't do anything else, like fight himself again, he has changed one of the timelines in a big way, by living in it. He goes back in time, reconnects with Peggy, and then marries her, lives with her, and apparently has kids. So, if that then became a new alternate reality, first off, how did he end up back in the Prime timeline at the end of the film, old and ready to give Sam his shield? Even if we ignore that, or if one of you has a plausible explanation for how that works, Steve living in the past with Peggy regardless changes things. Like I said, they have kids, so what consequences will that have? This theory suggests that the next phase of the MCU will largely be impacted by the consequences of Steve Rogers staying in the past, since in the Prime timeline there are technically 2 Steve Rogers, assuming that old Steve didn't jump through time again to return to the Prime timeline specifically at that moment to give Sam his shield, and all of us closure. Up next, number 4, the new Avengers team. Of course, one of the biggest speculations is what the future of the Avengers Initiative will look like, and who Nick Fury will recruit to take the place of the original team. Captain Marvel seems like the obvious choice, now back in contact with Earthlings, reacquainted with Fury, and definitely the next best thing in terms of replacing Steve Rogers. Sorry Sam, you're just not there yet, buddy. Spider-Man also seems like a shoo-in, since Fury, based on the Spider-Man Homecoming trailer, goes to the young hero for help, since, well, none of the heavy hitters, minus the Hulk, are left from the original team, assuming Hawkeye does take off to start the West Coast Avengers or retire like he intended prior to Civil War. Having the banner-fied Hulk still be a part of the team could work, but as a scientific consultant, which makes sense too. Who else? Well, it's a little hard to see Stephen Strange becoming a full-time member. Dude has a lot of responsibilities as Sorcerer Supreme, and same with T'Challa, being King of Wakanda and all. But Valkyrie could potentially take some time off from leading New Asgard to step into Thor's shoes on the team, and perhaps we've yet to be introduced to other potential characters who might become part of the roster. Speaking of new characters, in at number 3, Namor. There's a line in Endgame in which an earthquake under the sea is mentioned, and then is pretty much brushed off by the response of, "We handle it by not handling it." Sure, that could be pragmatism at its best, considering the Avengers had their hands full with, fixing Thanos' mess. But some fans have taken it as a hint to an upcoming introduction. We're talking Namor the Submariner. The rights to the character are still a little bit of a legal mess at the moment, so if this were true and it was a hint to the existence of the Golden Age anti-hero and King of Atlantis, that could potentially set up some solid story arcs in the future of the MCU, specifically between T'Challa and Namor, who go way back as rivals and foes. If the rights for Namor are settled, introducing the character and Atlantis as a threat to Wakanda could be an interesting direction for the future Black Panther films. And at number 2, Secret Invasion. This is another theory that surrounds the end scene with Peter returning to high school. As one user on Reddit pointed out, the administrator that is welcoming kids back to school behind Peter is actually a familiar face to the MCU. It's Ben Mendelsohn, who played Talos in Captain Marvel, the leader of the small group of Skrulls that Carol ended up aiding. His appearance in the film could mean that perhaps the MCU is laying the groundwork to introduce the next big saga that will begin in Phase 4, Secret Invasion, which was a theory that many had going into Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel's solo feature introduced the Skrulls to the MCU, a race of shape-shifting aliens who the Kree have long been engaging in war. The Skrulls were a big part of the Secret Invasion story event. They had infiltrated Earth and replaced some of the most prominent and important characters in the Marvel Universe with Skrull agents. Captain Marvel's film ultimately paints the Skrulls as the good guys and the Krees as the villains though, with the Skrull population dwindling thanks to the Kree's eradication of the race. But perhaps the Skrulls have returned to Earth now and are using it as a refuge. We still don't know what Carol has been up to in the past several decades too, between the 90s when her film was set and 2018 when the snap occurred. So who knows what the Skrulls have been up to. And finally, and at number 1, the snap created mutants. This is perhaps one of the most exciting theories on our list, that the events of Endgame will directly be responsible for the introduction of mutants into the MCU. So for context, consider this. On the Prime timeline, the Infinity Stones have been used to cause and affect universe-wide twice. The first was Thanos' initial snap in Infinity War, and the second when Bruce Banner revised the original snap after the Avengers made their own gauntlet. It's noted in both in the original Avengers and in Endgame that the stones give off gamma radiation. It's the reason why Hulk is able to survive using the new gauntlet and why Tony was not. So theoretically speaking, because of how massive an effect the stones had, there's a solid chance that a massive burst of gamma radiation could affect a small population of people, especially since the second gauntlet did not contain the stones as well as Thanos' original one from Eotri did. The theory speculates that the burst of radiation creates the mutants, therefore introducing them into the MCU and covering Marvel Studios' butt for not having mutants be present in the past. Another theory that explores the introduction to mutants is a riff off of the first theory we discussed on our list, that the universe will splinter and it will be on one of these alternate realities that mutants rise up. But if we're being honest, we'll likely see them in the Prime timeline. But events like Age of Apocalypse are now very much a possibility now that multiple timelines are floating around in the MCU. Alright, there we have it friends, so what do you think? What theories from our list do you think will actually pan out? What other major ones did we miss? And do you have theories of your own? Be sure to comment down below and let us know. If you dug this video, please spread the love and hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd for all of your MCU content, from updates to theories to lists and much more. In the meantime though, thanks for watching friends. I'll catch you on the next video.